He was once asked, "How do you treat others?" And he said, "There are no others."
Get inspired. Transform your life. Welcome to Best Interest Radio.
So today on the podcast, we have Olivier Weil. Now, we recorded this almost a year ago when I was living in my cottage in Shediac that I was renting, and it was just an awesome time and great conversations. In fact, there was a point where I stopped to get the chicken out of the oven, and we had a conversation about his time with Mr. Moy, which maybe we'll do a separate podcast with. But the stories that Olivier has and everything he has to share is just always so interesting, so fascinating and captivating, and I hope you guys really enjoy this one. The audio quality isn't as good as it is now, of course, because this was done so long ago and everything improves with age when we put effort into it. But needless to say, Olivier is one of the most inspiring, fascinating, interesting people that I know just from the things that he's done and his total demonstration of living and being. I mean, the guy's 50, looks like he's 30, and has the knowledge of an 800-year-old. So here it is. Hope you enjoy. All right, so we're sitting here with Olivier, and Olivier, I happened to meet one day in Passage, which is a boutique store in Moncton, New Brunswick, and he happened to tell me briefly about his story of how he helped remove the fluoride from the Moncton water, which is called Safe Water Moncton. If you wanted to look that up online, you just search on
safewatermoncton.com.
Okay. Anyways, and we also had an interesting conversation about Weston A. Price and they call it the teeth diet and the optimal diet for human teeth. And
Well, I think it's more just a compilation of research gathered on traditional eating habits around the world from communities who were still consuming their traditional diets. This is 1930s research, so these are communities that were sought out around the world, and it shed a lot of insight on the importance of fat-soluble vitamins like vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin K2 from foods. So Weston A. Price, yeah. He did a lot of work on helping people better understand what humans tend to consume when given the choice, and the degree to which animal foods are prioritized by humans, or were prior to the industrial, or prior to the in the 1930s, let's just say, and also he shed a lot of light on how plant-based foods were prepared through soaking, through sprouting, all kinds of practices to really minimize any of the toxins, any of the anti-nutrients that these foods contain, and also maximize nutrient absorption. That's how I would put it. Weston A. Price.
yeah, that's a good explanation of it. So yeah, when I ran into Olivier for the brief 10-15 minutes we saw each other, I learned about his work with Safe Water Moncton, and I learned a little bit about Weston A. Price, and so I went home and did some research, and that was actually that research is what led me to choose the right diet in order to heal my intestinal permeability, which we'll probably talk about more on another podcast. But for today, I'd like to know more about your history and your background, and kind of what your story is to where you started, and some maybe interesting things along the way, experiences that maybe were profound that taught you a lot in order to bring you to where you are today. So you kind of just start with anything that comes to mind, the first thing, if you wanted to.
Well, I think the first thing that comes to mind is it's a real pleasure to be here with you, Jordan.
Thank you.
This is a beautiful house, beautiful home here in Shediac, Parley Beach area. We were going to go in the water before the podcast. It's the month of December, and I have a feeling we're still going to go after the podcast, but we chose to focus on the podcast, get that done. But it's nice to be here with you in the countryside. We've been talking about doing this for a while, getting to know each other better. And both of us have a real interest in podcasts and basically putting, what we feel is, I guess, content that could be of value to other people out on the internet. We are two amongst an increasing number of people who are, using video and audio and just using the internet to try and share, hopefully, information that can really help people. And I think we both seem to agree that, to help people is to empower them, is to really give people, I always say, principle-based practices to help them really, not be so dependent on anyone, like whether they're from an alternative health care, or allopathic Western medicine. Like people are, it's always better to teach people how to fish than to give them fish, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So anyway, so you wanted me to talk a little bit about my background, where I've been, how I've gotten to where I'm at.
That's exactly. Yeah, I mean, I've heard briefly little bits and pieces of maybe your time in the monastery and your kind of what led you to do that, and along with I know you've traveled a lot and done a lot of things around the world. So let's just start with where did it all begin for you to embark on this journey of not only becoming a better version of yourself, but also just in wanting to help people and spreading your knowledge to other people in the world.
Sure. Yeah, spreading, I don't know if it's my knowledge or if it's just knowledge.
Yeah.
But well, I guess, I mean, it can be challenging to abbreviate and summarize things, but I'm 50 years old. I was born in 1969, month of May. And my dad, PhD in physics from France. My mom, writer, philosopher, actress, teacher from Cape Breton. Both my parents are Jewish through birth. The ancestral lineage, interestingly enough, is mostly Russian, Ukrainian, German, like Eastern European Jews, as far as as far as we've been able to trace it back. Even my mother's mother, Riva, who was born in Palestine, Israel, Palestine, she was born there, but her grandfather from Russia, he fled Russia due to persecutions in the 1800s and went to Palestine. So my mother's father, his background, his ancestors are from the Ukraine area. My mother's mother from Russia, and so on and so forth. So my dad, coming from France to Canada on scholarship for physics, meets my mom, and they get it on, and eventually one of those love-making sessions brought some cells together and gave my consciousness a vehicle. And growing up with my parents as a kid in Moncton, New Brunswick, being pretty much one of the only Jews in a predominantly Catholic, with the French people it was Catholic, with the English it was Protestant. No Christmas, you can imagine, not always easy for a kid. But, aside from the things that made me unique and sometimes challenged me when it came to socializing, as much as my parents were doing the best they could, and I'm super grateful to them, and the older I get, the more grateful I am for everything that they did to bring me into this world and to sustain me. The fact of the matter is my parents had a lot of problems within their own relationship, and so like a lot of middle class families, in the first world and the developed nations, I grew up with a lot of no physical abuse. There was no drugs and alcohol. I just grew up with a lot of stress, starting mostly around the age of like 4. I'm really blessed. Like my first 2 years, my mother was just the most devoted mother you can imagine, and all the boxes were pretty well checked. And then I don't know their relationship. I mean, I don't want to get into too many details about my parents' relationship, but like they were having problems, compatibility issues, communication issues, and my mother was starting to get more and more stressed, and eventually by the time I was 4, I think she started experiencing like sustained depressive episodes. And I'm not saying that that's just because of their relationship with my mom and dad. I mean, there's lots of factors, but let's just say that by the time I was 4, 5, 6, 7, as a young kid, I was living in a house where, for whatever reasons, I often felt insecure. I just felt stressed. And I think I can't put all the blame on my parents. I think the diet was also a factor. This is hindsight looking back. It was the 1970s. And back then, thankfully, we were still eating a lot of whole foods, but we also had the junk foods. Not as much accessibility to the packaged, edible, drinkable products as kids have today, but still a fair amount. And let's just say that, like a lot of kids, I tended to take things personally. I tended to focus on how things affected me, and I was suffering, And by the time I was like 12, we had moved a few times, been through different schools, and being popular, like if you listen to the writings of Gabor Mate or any of the really respected authorities, or I hate that word, but any of the respected doctors or researchers who really delve deeply into addiction and let's just say emotional trauma or emotional pain, they talk about how if parents, like if children don't feel, the less secure and bonded children feel with their parents, the more they will seek that from their peers. And that definitely was the case with me. So, I was, really not sure what to think about my parents. I mean, they provided for me, had a place to live, I had food, etc. But emotionally, it had been on and off so many times that I was pretty reluctant to really, bond and connect. So friends and popularity started to become more and more of a priority for me. Didn't take long before I tasted alcohol. And by the time I was 14, I had like my first good, my first experience with like being buzzed off Keith's beer. I think it was lager. Anyway, I had like 9 of these beers at a party, and I just felt so good. Like I drank them at a certain pace, and I felt so good. And I was sold. I mean, alcohol, marijuana, hashish, hippie types of, like rock and roll, sex, drugs, rock and roll. I wasn't having much sex, but by the time I was 14, although I had fooled around a lot with girls playing doctor and stuff. But anyway, I was just identifying with like the party scene, 70s rock, and I also liked football. So and looking back, there's like a double-edged sword about football, because I don't think football or high impact sports are really good, especially for the heads. You get a lot of micro concussions and stuff. But football at least gave me something to focus on and allowed me to develop discipline. So outside of football season, I was very focused. But outside of football season, it was just hedonism, just have a good time, party. Didn't take long before I was getting to have the house to myself, and my parents would go rent a cottage not far from here in Shediac, and I would just party. I mean, drink, get high, go to the beach. I would work in warehouses. I would do temp work whenever it rained. I would go in and do temp work, and if it was sunny out, I'd go to the beach, and by 11 noon, we were smoking dope and drinking and playing frisbee and swimming, and that was what life was like. By the time I was 18, I started experiencing like what we could call the all that drinking and lifestyle was starting to take its toll on me. Next thing you know, I'm in university, and university was University of Moncton at first, and nobody cared if I went to class anymore. I didn't have anything to rebel against. So I started to apply myself. I got really into human biology, and that led to like a health food phase of my life. I already at that time was doing most of the grocery shopping and cooking for the house. So I just, the combination of the human biology and human physiology and being the person doing the groceries and a lot of the cooking at house really allowed me to start to go into like this health food culture. But then, it didn't take long before the summer came back around and I was partying again, going to rock concerts, and we'd travel to Toronto sometimes to see the Rolling Stones. I remember in 1988. And this was the beginning of what turned into bulimia. I was this young, 18, 19-year-old who knew things about food and biology, but, still liked to party, and also take away the booze and the alcohol, take away everything. My default set point was a pretty anxious young man. I know this by looking back, and so like a lot of eating disorder, like a lot of people who've developed eating disorders, like all anxiety-based disorders, parts of your nervous system are when it comes to anxiety, if you want to get technical, the basal ganglia, it revs high. If you look at a functional MRI or a PET scan, it's revving high for whatever reasons. You're prone to anxiety. You can also be very motivated. One person's anxiety is another person's motivation. But anyway, didn't take long, where a bunch of factors, many of which I'm not going to mention right now, led to me slowly developing bulimia, where I never made myself puke, but I would kind of binge and fast, but not fasting for health reasons, fasting because I wanted to correct things or because I felt guilty or whatever. And when I'd binge on, like foods, well, I wouldn't even call them foods. I'd binge on very tasty things that, were really wreaked havoc on my system. Next thing you know, I'm in Ottawa. I'm still studying university. I went down to like 140 pounds at that time in my life. Cigarettes, coffee, trying to control this eating habit. It's obsessive. I would either not care or get obsessive. And eventually I just had enough. I was like, man, I don't know what I'm doing. University, this, that, the other thing. I decided I needed to make a change. I decided I was going to go to Europe and backpack around Europe. Fast forward, I'm back in Moncton, saving money to go to Europe.
Did you feel like the change in environment would help you change the habits that you were portraying at the time?
I didn't really know at the time. At the time, like a lot of young people, I identified with the idea of like going off into the world, adventure, and the whole idea about finding yourself and stuff. Yeah. Something that I once heard Bob Dylan say, life isn't about finding yourself. Life is about creating yourself. And I very much agree with that. So anyway, I'm saving money to go to Europe. And one thing leads to the next. And like my best friends, they all went to Vancouver. And I was like in Moncton, and they were all gone. These were like my best friends. We were like a group of four or five that used to really party hard. And a lot of the drinking and the smoking and the music was really what we shared in common. And so a lot of those habits were really, a function of our relationship. And they were gone. And I'm saving money. I had this focus, like go to Europe, save money, work. And I went to this party with these artist types, these poets, and I went to this party in Capillet, and there was no alcohol, no marijuana, no hashish, and I ended up, I knew I was going to be. I was asked if I wanted to go, and I knew that there were going to be psilocybin mushrooms at this party, and I was open to it. And I ended up having the most amazing experience. I was very lucky because I believe that psilocybin and any of the entheogen compounds, that I really believe that they definitely have therapeutic potential, incredible therapeutic potential. But I also believe that without proper preparation, that people can have dangerous experiences on them. So anyway, I had an amazing experience, and I realized a lot of things. And during that experience, it's hard to put into words, but let's just say that I came to understand deep within me something became very clear about my relationship with alcohol. And I saw that I knew within the deepest recesses of my consciousness, I knew in a flash, it's really hard to explain, but I had this awareness move through me. And as this awareness moved through me, I just knew where I was heading with my relationship with alcohol. I knew I was heading towards sickness and an early death.
Yeah, I can relate. I've had a similar experience where I've realized the same thing, not just with alcohol, but with food and habits and relationships and all that. So
yeah, it's really hard to put into words. And we know that the stats on, now that there's this renaissance happening throughout, North America and Europe, with like Ivy League universities doing research on the therapeutic potential of DMT, of psilocybin, of LSD, in the right context. We know that like helping people free themselves from addictions, it's very high percentile. It's quite astonishing. But this is not just the medication. It's the whole therapeutic protocol. But anyway, in my case, it was like amazing, and I also fell in love. I fell in love with Patricia that night. It took 3 months before we became a couple, but I fell in love with this woman that night too. My heart opened, and I was kind of had like a, we could call almost a minor rebirth, which is very common to people who have these experiences. I was on a pretty high dose, from what I understand too. Anyway, so next thing you know, fast forward, I'm in a relationship with Patricia, totally in love, hippie, long hair, not really drinking much anymore. Used to have maybe the odd beer or two, but not really drinking. Still smoking lots of hash and marijuana. Did not move away from that dependency for many years to come. But anyway, and next thing you know, Patricia and I both go to Europe together. We're backpacking around Europe. I was always a very independent and very resourceful person, and traveling, I just, used those skills and developed those skills all the more. And we were moving all around Europe, picking grapes, just doing the backpacking Europe thing, and making our way. We ended up in London at one point. I was working at a photo lab. She was working at a restaurant. And from England we went to India, and I'm skipping lots of details, but next thing you know, it's like 1991, and Patricia and I are flying from London, England, to Delhi, and we were supposed to spend 3 months, but we only spent a month and a half. That's because Patricia basically decided she got homesick. It had been 9 months in all since we had left Canada. But anyway, we were in in India and Delhi. We were in India and Nepal for a month and a half, and I was getting exposed to more and more, esoteric philosophies, which happens to even in Europe. I was getting exposed to esoteric philosophies, but here I was in India, and I'm getting exposed to a lot of ideas and teachings about mind, about body, about spirit, and I'm clicking, like it's just I'm identifying with it big time. And also in the mountains, we're hiking in the mountains in the Annapurna sanctuary. We went up to 4,100 meters in an 8-day trek, and I had sustained very serious injuries to my knees playing football. So I never went into that, but let's just say briefly that when I was 14, I got a serious knee injury to my right knee. And then when I was 17, I got major damage. I got blown out ligaments to my left knee. I ended up going through something like a month and a half of physiotherapy, 5 days a week. It's a long story, but my knee was like destroyed. I mean, it was the size of a volleyball by the time I was at the hospital. They were draining blood out of my knee, and my ligaments were damaged. And anyone knows anything about ligament damage, it's serious, especially with the knee. It's a very complicated joint. And I had healed enough to, because this happened in the preseason game of all things. It was my final year in high school, preseason game. My knee gets blown to bits. I went to physio 5 days a week at the SEPS with one of Moncton's top physiotherapists. I was healed enough to play the final 3 games, which included, I think, included the playoffs, with a major tape job, and it was great. But until I was in the mountains in 1991, so the football injury happened in 1987, 88, which is when I graduated, so fall of 87. In 1991, I'm hiking in the mountains, and somehow my knee is healing more than ever because it was always problematic. And not just my knee, but my mind, like the higher I would go in these mountains. And it was cool because we were a group, and it allowed me, or it somehow facilitated my ability to hike at whatever pace I wanted. Sometimes I'd be ahead of the group, sometimes I'd be behind the group, or sometimes I'd be with the group. I would talk if I felt like talking, not talk if I didn't feel like talking. And there were days where maybe I'd go 3, 4, 5 hours without talking and with almost not thinking. It was amazing. You know, bamboo forests at 2,000 meters in the Himalaya mountains. And something was happening, and I was experiencing a quieting of my mind, the likes of which I probably hadn't experienced, I probably hadn't experienced since I'd been a young infant. It was amazing. And my knees, I was doing this hike, by the way, in cowboy boots. Like me and Patricia were hippie types. So my knee was getting stronger and stronger, more and more flexible, less and less pain. And I don't know, that combined with all these other, I met a woman from Australia who did Tai Chi, and anyway, next thing you know, we're back in Canada, and we ended up going out Western Canada. Like a lot of people, we went to Jasper, and we're working in the hotels, and me and Patricia eventually broke up, and it was my first major love. I mean, I was engaged to Patricia. Like, I loved Patricia, and I planned to marry Patricia, and we were young, and we ended up becoming less and less compatible, and I had a lot of issues. She had a lot of issues. I had a lot of issues. I still have issues. But anyway, I had a lot of issues, and we broke up, and I just was hanging out more and more with poet types, artist types, hanging out in the mountains. I still smoked marijuana hashish, but I smoked it less abusively. I drank practically never. And I don't know, like I started doing Tai Chi with an instructor from Edmonton, and he was a student of Moi Lin Shin, who was the founder of the Taoist Tai Chi Society. And at this point in my life, like ever since the bulimia, I had had major digestive issues. I used to have acid reflux, and I rarely could feel my appetite. Like I just, I was okay. Like it didn't. The bulimia only lasted really for about 6 to 7 months. Eventually, I relaxed about it. Yeah. But I just had difficulty with eating and feeling comfortable with food, and I mean that was just an extension of my overall predisposition for anxiety. But anyway. So I'm in the Rocky Mountains. I'm doing Tai Chi. And my whole system's starting to calm down more than ever. And my acid reflux is going away. And I'm starting to really, on a regular basis, feel my body. Like, feel it deeply. And I'm working with my body. It's not the same as football. It's softer, flexibility, organs, nervous system, and I'm just becoming more balanced, relatively speaking, more balanced. And I remember one day I went and I did like an hour and a half practice of my Tai Chi, and when I was done, I looked around and I thought to myself, I felt at the time like I had taken a tiny bit of LSD. I hadn't. But, now that we know that microdosing has become quite popular when it comes to psilocybin, LSD, and all this stuff. So microdosing, people can go and look that up for themselves if they don't know what it is. But it's interesting how, like, my Tai Chi practice that day I had never heard of microdosing back then. But in my mind, I was like, wow, this feels like I've done like a little tiny bit of LSD, even though I hadn't. And I think it speaks to the merit of yogic qigong or, any kind of mind-body practice that's, done in an effective way, allows the nervous system, the endocrine system, that's your hormones, your digestive system, your whole physiology to come into a more optimal state. And that was definitely happening with me. So by now it's like 1992, 1993. Tai Chi is becoming more and more a thing for me. The mountains are still a thing for me. It doesn't take long before I'm in Calgary. At this point, I was involved with a woman named Donna. She was an amazing singer, mountain biker, alpine climber. And we're living in Calgary, and I'm going to this Taoist Tai Chi club in Calgary. That's my thing. And we start climbing together more and more, rock climbing, ice climbing, still smoking weed and stuff. I'm a vegetarian at this point in my life, which is a whole other story. But anyway, we're doing our thing. Eventually we break up in like 1993, I guess 1994. And at that point, the mountains, I used to struggle back then. Like, should I focus on Tai Chi? Should I focus on climbing? And I ended up focusing on climbing. I got really into climbing and tree planting. Living in Canmore, Banff. Didn't take long. I had a motorcycle. I had a van. And basically my life was tree planting. And I still did a bit of Tai Chi, but it was like tree planting and climbing. And I had all these goals, and I was like basically backcountry skiing, climbing in the Rocky Mountains or the southwestern USA, Nevada, California, depending on the weather, basically. Like if the avalanche conditions were high in the Rockies, we'd go down south or whatever. So mountaineering, alpine climbing, rock climbing, multi-pitch climbing, backcountry skiing, like that was my thing. And I would go at it so hard because, you see, I was deep down inside still an anxious guy. And in a way, the climbing was my new drug. And, I had all these climbing partners who would tell me, like, man, whenever I go climbing with you, like, we always, like, we're always going home. It's dark. And it's, it's like I would just push the envelope. I would rarely take days off. I would get tendinitis, which would give me more opportunity to learn about healing. But, and it was climbing, and it's really hard to sum all this stuff up. But eventually, in 1995, Donna, who we were broken up, but Donna and I still kept in touch. And Donna got really sick with hyperthyroidism and Graves' disease. And you got to remember that I had a background in human biology, human physiology. I had been exposed to a lot of medicinal concepts from India and then through the Taoist Tai Chi Society. And, I was like concerned about Donna, and I knew that there was a way for her. The doctors wanted to operate. They wanted to take out her thyroid gland. And I was like, whoa. And she was like stabilized on medication, so there was nothing urgent. She could take her time to make her decision. So long story short is I ended up, because I loved her, even though we weren't still together, like I still loved her like deeply. I mean, she had been one of the great loves of my life, and we were not a couple, but I wanted to do everything I could to help her, and so I found myself saying to her, like, why don't we go to Toronto together? I started off saying, like, have you looked into alternative treatments? And I was doing research and finding out that there were all kinds of people who had brought their thyroid gland back into a good functional state without an operation, and were even medication free. Like, it was possible. And anyway, long story short is I leave BC 1 week before what would have been the biggest paying tree planting contract of my career. I had been tree planting at that time for about 2 years. That would have been my third year. And I was going to be making easy $300 a day. 1995, that's good money. I had no money in the bank. So Donna didn't want to go. She was tempted, but she was scared. So the idea was we go to Toronto, and we go see Mr. Moy from the Taoist Tai Chi Society, who I believe to be a very genuine holistic healer based on everything I learned about him when I was involved with the Taoist Tai Chi Society. And I told her, I said, if he can't help you, I'm sure someone in Toronto can. And once you've exhausted that, if you still want to get the operation, you could get it. And she didn't know what to do, blah, 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 blah. And anyway, finally, it's so hard to explain. I still felt this calling myself. Like I've skipped a lot of details, but I always, even when I was a climber, I was still really, had a lot of identification with like more of a spiritual, whole being cultivation lifestyle. And it got to the point where it was like, I'm going to go to Toronto with or without Donna. And it was scaring the crap out of me. It was really scaring me. I had no money, and I would, and the tree planting contract kept getting delayed because of weather. It was the weirdest set of factors.
Yeah.
I was in Vancouver waiting for a tree planting contract that kept getting delayed. I was seriously considering going to Toronto. Even after Donna said she wasn't going to go, I found myself feeling like I would go. I would wake up in the morning before I was fully awake, and I would have these feelings and these thoughts that I need to go to Toronto, not just for Donna, but for myself. I should go and see what Mr. Moy is like myself. What kind of teacher is he? I used to read a lot of Carlos Castaneda back then, who I eventually came to discover was a fraud. But anyway, I was identifying with Don Juan Matus, the shaman, the great teacher in the books. And I felt like Mr. Moy, maybe he was like a real live version of this, in his own way. So next thing you know, I decided one day, I'm like, you know what? I said to myself, I'm supposed to be this free spirit. I'm supposed to be brave and strong and a climber and a mountaineer. And I'm scared to go to Toronto because I don't have much money in the bank. Fuck that. I was like, fuck that. I can always come back. The mountains are not going anywhere. Tree planting's not going anywhere. I'm going. Donna's sick. Maybe she'll come if I'm there. So I drive across the country in record time. It's crazy. I get to Toronto. P.S. Side note, by then I'm eating meat again, which that's a whole other story, but it was definitely helping me. I was more of an omnivore back
Making
then.
you feel a lot better, yeah.
Yeah, I was a lot better. But anyway, I get to Toronto. Excuse me, I'm just having a bit of water here. I get to Toronto, and I'm going to have to really abbreviate that whole thing. But let's just say that one thing led to the next. Donna came. We go to a Tai Chi class where Mr. Moy was teaching. I mean, he was sort of teaching in the background. He'd sort of have other instructors teach, and he'd just sort of watch. And I introduce, basically Donna went up to him and asked him if he could help her. And he asked her a bunch of questions, and next thing you know, he invited her to go to his morning class at the temple where he lived in Chinatown, Toronto. And she went, and she had a really good experience. And then the next day, I went too. And I remember some of the students were like, well, what are you doing here? And I was like, well, I'm with Donna. And they're like, yeah, but like Mr. Moy invited Donna, like, like this is more of an invitation thing. Like, and I was like, well, and then Mr. Moy arrived, and there was some kind of exchange in English Chinese, and he said something like, yeah, he's okay. So I got to stick around. So next thing you know, Donna and I are going to this temple on a regular basis, and Mr. Moy's helping her, and I got to skip the details, but let's just say that it was fucking blowing my mind. Like, her goiter was going down. Her eye swelling was going down. Like, it was.
What kind of stuff were they doing for?
Well, he was basically, he had one of his experienced instructors showing her 2 foundation movements that she would do for an entire hour, and he had her do these movements, and he was explaining to her that she had to learn these foundation movements and practice them, and in her case, because she was sick, she really had to like learn it and do it properly. And then every so often in this first week, and for the record, I was told by everybody that they'd never seen him do it this often, but on 3 separate occasions during this week, he went up to her and he took her, and basically started giving her what is a Qigong treatment, where he would take her, she'd be doing some movement, he'd just walk up to her and he would just take her body, she'd be standing, and he'd start poking his fingers into parts of her body, like, nothing like, in her body, like not her genital areas, like it was all legit. It was in front of a lot of people. She was dressed, everything, and he's just whacking her, like it's the weirdest thing. Like
find different like pressure points and stuff.
I don't think it can be explained, like, because it's not your typical. He's whacking her and touching her and driving his finger. Like at one point he has her mouth open and he's got his fingers inside her mouth. At one point he's whacking her throat. Like he's kind of holding her in one arm and she's sort of in a back bend and she's just completely surrendering. And he's just like hitting her tummy in this area and that area and driving his fingers. Like it's the weirdest thing. Like
so, like while she's doing qigong.
He's just holding her and she's just surrendering and and it lasts a matter of minutes. And then he just sort of stands her up on her 2 feet and he just sort of settles her and then he walks away. And he literally walks away and out of the room. And he did this 3 times to her. And I asked her later on those days what that was like, and she said to me that she could hardly put it into words. She said there were surges of energy moving through her. And you got to understand something. Donna is not a woo-woo, flaky person. She's an open-minded person. And even myself, like I'm an open-minded person, but I'm very grounded. I'm very skeptical. I don't jump on board with anything. And I really highly value questioning things.
Yeah.
And anyway, it's very hard to explain, but he did something to her. It's sort of like jump starting. It's like he was like, the explanation was that he was opening things up in her and like her meridians and stuff. He was opening things up and he was putting literally his chi, giving her some blasts inside there.
Okay.
And so anyway, weeks go by. She's struggling because her family, this is part of the problem with holistic healing, is that you get all these pressures from your family and from other, and so she doesn't know what to do because her family thinks she's nuts. Like she's supposed to be getting an operation for a very serious condition.
Was it already booked, like the operation?
No, it wasn't booked, but she's stabilized by this medication, but her family thinks she's nuts, that she's at a temple with some Taoist monk, and she's getting pressure from her parents and her family, and even from herself. She's like not sure what she's doing, and I'm saying to her, like, look, you're getting better. Like, you have to decide.
So she's noticing like significant results at this point.
Oh my God, she was blown away by how she felt that first week.
Yeah.
Like her heart rate was calmer. You got to understand something. She was stabilized by that medication, but hyperthyroidism, her heart could go up to 180 beats a minute.
Yeah.
Like she had swollen eyes. Her eye swelling was going down. I mean, I'm watching all this and I'm just like, Donna, this is this is amazing. Like, and she was going with it, but then after about 2-3 weeks, she started to not know what to do. She started to waffle. And about a week after she was waffling, Mr. Moy actually, through a translator, said to her, you're going to need to make up your mind. You have to decide what you want. He just said that to her. He said, you got to decide, like, do you want to go get the operation or do you want to, because you don't, he let her know, like, it's up to her. Right? And she didn't know what to do. For about 3 weeks, she was just completely, and I was just like, what? And I would try to give her space and stuff. And eventually she left. She went to Ottawa and she came back and she said to me, she said, you know what? I know I can heal with this, but I feel like I'm just going to go do the operation and go back out west. And I was like, Donna, why don't you just like finish healing and then go out west? And she's like, yeah, but I don't know, like I feel like if I let him help me, then I'm going to need to help other people. And I'm like, so what's wrong with that? And she's like, I don't know. And I'm like, well, listen, it's your choice. But Mr. Moy has not asked anything of you. There's no conditions here. You can let him help you, and you're basically helping yourself. He's just showing you how to help yourself. Anyway, long story short, after 6 weeks, she just decided to have the operation. But I had seen enough for me. Like,
yeah, I mean, I've had some patients with hyperthyroidism, and there's a lot of stuff that goes along with that. So, I mean, if she's experiencing profound results from what she was following through the Qigong and Tai Chi.
Well, she was doing mostly the foundation movements for the Tai Chi.
Okay, yeah.
She was doing what are called Danyus and Toyus, and Mr. Moy explained to her that she didn't have, because of her condition, she needed to just work on those 2 movements, which basically include all of the principles from the Tai Chi set.
Yeah.
This is Taoist Tai Chi. It's a little different than Yang style or Chen style. Anyway, it's a very internal form. Often gets criticized because the organization is very large. But Mr. Moy knew what he was doing. And anyway, long story short, she leaves.
Yeah.
I stay. Didn't take long before I ended up moving into the center. I got very close to Mr. Moy. To this day, like Mr. Moy was, this was towards the end of his life. I was very close to him. I'm still learning from my time with Mr. Moy. Like, I cannot. We could do a whole we could do like 10 podcasts about my time at the temple.
Still like unpacking everything.
I'm still refining what I was exposed to. But let's just say that during the years that I was around him, I would work sales for the Toronto Star and then later the Globe and Mail. Eventually, I would work sales. I would teach Tai Chi as a rehabilitative therapeutic practice. I taught it. Eventually, I was teaching in hospitals. I was teaching a special class for people who had HIV. I was teaching people who, we call them health recovery classes. So these were classes with people with MS, Parkinson's, people recovering from strokes, people recovering from severe car accidents. These were people who had been told at one point by the physiotherapist there's nothing else they could do, and these people wanted to go further. And they came to the Taoist Tai Chi Society, and they got enrolled in these special classes, and I happened to be one of the instructors. And I was learning so much. It was blowing my mind. That's not including what I was going through with my own body. And it was just an amazing time of my life. Like, I was around all these senior instructors. I was around Mr. Moy. He it was being around him. It was the way he moved. It was the way he behaved, because he wasn't much of a talker. And we were feeding the homeless. We were doing, and I was a volunteer instructor. It was an amazing organization, an amazing time in my life. Anyway, learning a lot about traditional Chinese medicine and food and just so much stuff. And learning it through experience, not so much through books. And one of the things Mr. Moy really encouraged students to do, besides teach and help other people, is, because, he used to say like that the Qigong, the stretching, the tendon changing, the Tai Chi, all of that transformative, all of those what are called Taoist internal arts, all of the alchemical Taoist arts of healing and transformation, he used to say, that's for you. But he used to say, unless you cultivate selfless giving, unless you cultivate a selfless heart, and he meant cultivate like it's a lifelong thing, like you don't just snap your fingers and become selfless. You cultivate it because you have to refine it. He used to say, if you don't cultivate that, you're not going to get very far with your personal practice. Yeah. And that was something that, we were all discovering that, and I'm still discovering that, because let's face it, egocentrism and narcissism, I'm not an extreme narcissist, but I think we all tend to focus on ourselves, and you have to some extent. You've got to have a balance. It's like that famous quote from the Hillel, there's a famous Jewish sage from before the time of Jesus. He was known to say, his quote is, if I don't take care of myself, if I don't take care of others, here's the quote. If I don't take care of myself, who will? And if I don't take care of others, who am I?
Oh, the chickens.
We got a timer going off for the chicken.
Take
here.
a pause. Okay, so we're back from our little break, and we were at the temple with Mr. Moy. We should talk a little bit about him, but sounds like a very wise, caring man who taught you probably more than you could even explain in words. And it sounds like you learned a lot at that temple.
Yeah.
What if you could summarize it?
Well, I would just say
the top 3 things that you gained, top 3 valuable things you might have gained from your whole experience at the monastery with Mr. Moy.
Top 3, I don't know. I mean, I guess
Doesn't have to be
I
in
guess
order.
I guess I guess what I guess one yeah, I guess I could say so number one, my time around Mr. Moy provided me with a foundation for optimizing my whole being, you know. And number two, like optimizing my being independent of interactions with say others. Let's just say, like, when it comes to like working with my musculoskeletal system, working with my organs, working with my physiology, my mind, my spirit, Mr. Moy, my time around him, because it's you gotta understand something. Like, I never treated Mr. Moy like he was my guru. I mean, I had incredible respect and love for him, but you know, he was my teacher. And anyway, so he provided me with a really thorough foundation. He also provided me with, and all of this was mostly through example and experience-based learning, because Mr. Moy would teach you by showing you or by getting you to do something. And the second thing was selfless giving. And when I say selfless giving, I mean like in a healthy, balanced, appropriate way. I never saw Mr. Moy pity anyone. I came to see the difference between compassion and pity. They are not the same thing.
Yeah.
Mr. Moy was incredibly skilled at empowering people. He could challenge you. He could scold you if you were his student. Not in a malevolent way, always in a loving way. But, you know, he could somehow, in weird ways, kind of help you get over your ego self and get into your true nature. In Taoism, the goal of Taoist training is to cultivate your original nature. And selflessness, because it's sort of like that famous guru from India, I can't remember his name right now, Sri Rama something. He was once asked, how do you treat others? This is a very famous guru from India. And he said, there are no others. I mean, it's a pretty powerful concept, right?
Yeah.
You know, but anyway, so you asked for three things. So one, I would say the foundation for like working with your physiology in a very complete way. And in a way that included like, it's not like he gave me a good foundation. And part of that foundation is that it has no limits and that it's important to question things. And, you know, it's hard to put into words, but I would say one is more of the physical kind of what you can do for yourself. Stretching, breathing. I mean, he didn't really teach us breathing practices, but like working with your physiology. Stretching, self-massage, massaging, movements, let's just say, that kind of stuff. The Qigong, the yogic Qigong, Tai Chi type stuff. Number two is the lifelong art of selflessness. And number three, I think, is no dogma. Like, you know, we're always we're as humans, you know, and from a neuroscientific perspective, you know, we are highly skilled. I mean, part of our being requires conditioning, like, you know, the way we sit, the way we walk, driving cars, if you're a goaltender, if you're a musician, like, there's tons and tons of stuff that we learn and becomes automatic. But it's when the automatic thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, if they're working for us, if they're doing more good than harm, great. But it's when they start to hinder, impede our understanding, you know, it's when they get in the way of things. And that's what dogma is. It's like, you know, and Mr. Moy would sometimes say, like, no dogma, you know, question things. So I would say those three things if I had to say three things.
That's good. Those are good points.
Yeah. Yeah, he was an amazing. I mean, I still feel so. I mean, as you know, anyway, I was going to say, like, I pray and meditate regularly, and I don't know if spirits, like, I don't really care if spirits are just a figment of my imagination or if they're really, truly, it doesn't matter to me. I connect with the spirit of Mr. Moy regularly, the spirit of my ancestors and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, anyway, moving on. So, should I just keep going?
Yeah. You
So,
go ahead with your story.
so eventually, Mr. Moy, eventually life changes. Mr. Moy passed away in 1998. That was a big deal. We'll just skip all the details on that. I'm still at the temple. Things are changing within the organization. All of the different boards of directors now, there's more ego, there's more power struggles. I mean, when he was alive, everyone just was that much more humble. I mean, he was the founder.
Yeah.
Now, I think people are struggling with their sense of responsibility, and there's more and more politics. There were always politics. This is a big organization. And I'm there, and, what am I going to do with my life? I'm eventually I go back to university. And that was in part motivated by Mr. Moy. Even though I already had a background in human biology and physiology, Mr. Moy was very encouraging of people to not necessarily go to university, but he would always encourage instructors to study human physiology. He would say, you're Westerners, study human physiology, learn about all these tissues and organs and systems, learn about them. And I went to University of Toronto. I was living downtown Toronto, and I'm at University of Toronto. I'm still living at the Temple, down in Darcy Street in Chinatown, and I switch work. So I'm working. I go to school. I had saved up quite a bit of money for my sales work, and when my first year of university ended, I was in human physiology. I was in life sciences, and loving it. And cellular and molecular biology, organic chemistry, and human physiology especially. This was a major third year. This was like a big human physiology course. It was really, really, we would go intense into all the different systems. And by the time summer came around, I had to decide, am I going to go do more sales or something else? And sales paid pretty good. But I don't know. I felt like I should do something different, and I wanted to cook. I already used to cook at the temple. That was sort of one of my duties, one of my responsibilities. I don't know, I wanted to cook. So that didn't really make much sense because I was making about $35 an hour on average through my commission sales work. But then cooking would be like $9, $10, $11 an hour. But something inside of me. So next thing you know, I'm cooking. And also, by the end of the summer, I decided I need to move out of the temple. And I moved not far. I moved a few blocks north on campus. And I don't know, I still had a key to the temple, and I'm living student co-op housing, and I'm going to university, and I switched jobs. I started cooking at this big residence, like at University of Toronto, one of the big residences, and it's just crazy. Like, my week was crazy. I was working 35 hours a week in this big industrial kitchen, and going to school, and starting to really stress out, and not using any drugs, not smoking any weed. I hadn't smoked any weed since I arrived at the temple. I didn't feel a need for that anymore. But now I'm a little bit addicted to having to do it on my own. That became sort of my new thing. It's like, oh, I know so much from all my time at the temple and Mr. Moy, and I know so much, and I should be able to do everything. It's almost like a superhero complex. And I had this crazy schedule of work, and I was thinking about becoming a doctor, and not because I really wanted to practice Western medicine, because I wanted to help people, and I figured that license would open doors. But anyway, the pressure started getting really crazy, and I started developing some real obsessive compulsive behaviors. At first they seemed pretty benign, and I was sleep deprived. Like I would literally sleep like 3-4 hours a night, night after night after night. I would work in the kitchen, I would do my university stuff, and I just was just driving myself, like pushing myself. And as much as I was an open-minded, I was open-minded, but as much as I discussed things open-heartedly, the truth is that there was a lot of things that I kept to myself, and I wanted to be, I wanted to deal with it on my own. And by December that year, the year 2000, like by January 2000, by the end of 1999, 2000, I had started having episodes of obsessive compulsive behaviors which were not good. They were episodes, they didn't hurt anyone, but they were troubling. And I couldn't tell at the time if they were just behaviors that I had to do because of a gut and an intuitive need. I couldn't tell at the time. Looking back, I can say that they were completely fucked up. But without getting into the details of all that, let's just say that I started really struggling with my mental health. And that underlying anxiety predisposition that had given birth to bulimia, that had always been soothed through alcohol and then marijuana, and soothed through climbing, and soothed through the incredible environment at the temple, and soothed through Tai Chi and all that. Well, I was trying to accomplish all this stuff, and I was starting to fall apart, and not talking about it with anyone, because I was determined to figure it out and handle it on my own. And I almost quit my courses that in the year 2000, and all my courses were full year. And for January, February, year 2000, I became pretty dysfunctional. Like I could go to work and cook, no problem. But when it came to my homework, my mind, like my ability to focus, was so hampered. And then I didn't even know if I should do it anymore, and I started questioning everything. And come February, I was so behind. And then I started thinking maybe I should just quit these courses. And it was crazy. I went to my professors, asked for special permission to quit them because I was past the regular date and I didn't want to get penalized. They grant me special permission. I go home, realize, what the hell am I doing? These are full year courses. I'm like 3/4 in and I'm just going to quit? Fuck that. I go to my boss at the kitchen in the residence and I say, listen, I'm really fucked up and I just quit my courses. I asked for special permission to quit my courses, but I'm realizing that it'd be better if I actually stepped back from cooking, stopped working, and just focused on my courses. And they're like, okay. So then I spend the whole weekend, instead of working, I spend the whole weekend trying to catch up on my courses. And I go back to my professors with all this work I did. And one of them, the course was all about academic research. It was called the academic writing process. It was the hardest course. Half the course quit. And I went to him and I said, listen, and he was worried about me. And I said, listen, I know I came and I asked for special permission. And I was so afraid he was going to get mad at me. I was afraid he was going to say, look, first you come for me for special permission. Now you want to go back in. And he just was so nice. And I went to him and I had a draft for an essay. The essay was going to be 60% of our note. It was basically a research paper, like something you'd put in a scientific journal. Yeah. And I went to him with a first draft. I spent the whole weekend working on that, and the cellular molecular biology course was a similar project. And I went to both professors with something in my hand, and I said, listen, I'm really messed up. I don't know what to do, but would you be willing to look at this and tell me if you think I have a chance? And I was so afraid he'd get mad. So afraid. I even went to see a psychologist and explained how terrified I was. And anyway, I went, he took it, he said, I will do whatever I can to help you. He looked at it, got back to me, next day said, "You've got something here you can work with. If you keep applying yourself, I see no reason why you can't." So that was it. I finished those courses. I went back to cooking that summer. That summer I was cooking on these big boats in Ontario, Lake Ontario. Just, Toronto there's like a harbor. And I was working on catering on these big boats. One of them was a huge sailboat. It was a lot of fun. And then I decided I needed to make some changes. And I decided I'm going to leave Toronto, go to Europe. I'm going to take a break from university. I was glad I finished my courses. I got an A in both those courses, A- in both those courses. And I decided to go to Europe to visit my grandmother, my dad's mom. I had always been so close to her as a child, and I hadn't seen her. I hadn't seen any of the European family in over 10 years. I was pretty distanced from my parents, too, at this point in my life. I used to talk to them on the phone and stuff, but I only visited my parents like a couple of times since they got divorced. They got divorced in 1993. So it's the year 2000, and let me just think here. Is it 2000 or 2001? I'm getting confused here. No, it's 2001. Sorry, I screwed up. So the obsessiveness started in December 2000. That's right. And 2001 is when I almost quit the courses but didn't. Summer of 2001, I'm working on the boats. Decide to go to Europe. September 2001, my plane ticket was booked. It was booked, I know the date, because it was 3 days after 9/11.
Oh, yeah.
And I flew out of Toronto, and I mean, the planes were all shut down on 9/11. But yeah, our plane was delayed, but it was an 8-hour delay, but it still flew out. And on September, whatever 3 day, 11 plus 3 is, what is that? 3 and 11 is 14. So September 14th, I leave Toronto. I go to France. I hang out with my grandmother, reconnect with her. I start traveling around France, reconnecting with all the family. End up in this small village where my sister was living, doing pottery. Stay there, cut wood, do odd jobs, start studying for the MCAT, thinking I'm still going to become a doctor. Everything was going well, and then, I don't know, I got involved with this beautiful woman, but it was too fast. I was still really prone to anxiety. Next thing you know, I'm getting all obsessive and compulsive again. I'm starting to unravel again. I ended up in Paris. Long story. It's really hard to talk about. She was pregnant. I was willing to help raise the child, but I wasn't prepared to commit to marriage. I just felt that I needed to I wasn't prepared. She wasn't prepared to have the child unless she was in a committed relationship. It was terrible. It was the most nightmarish time of my life. I thought I was going crazy. She ended up having an abortion. I became suicidal. I'm in Paris. I had cousins in Paris, like the age of my parents, like my dad's cousins. I'm just living in Paris, like hotel to hotel, spending my savings. Took 6 months. I was seriously suicidal for 6 months. Ended up cooking for this family, this Jewish family, like ultra-Orthodox Hasidic family. Not so Orthodox that they had no contact with the outside world, but Hasidic family. I'm cooking for them, getting to know Jewish culture. Anyway, ended up living in France ended up cooking and living on my own in Paris from 2002 to 2005. Did some hotel gigs here and there. Basically, my life became cooking. I got past the depression and the suicidal stuff, but I just cooked. I cooked for 20 different caterers. I did everything I could to become like a chef and a sous chef. I did hotel gigs. I would do short contracts. So I was like basically a temp cook, chef, sous chef with 20 different caterers, making good money, learning incredible amounts of skills about cooking. then I would take on these short gigs at hotels for a few months here and there for special occasions, and restaurant one time for 3 months. And it was kind of all linked to the work I was doing for the caterers. I was still working on my own health with everything I learned at the temple and other things I was learning. I was pretty freaked out by my mental health. And I was just keeping it under wraps by basically, at that point in my life, I managed triggers. I did everything I could to try and not get stressed out with certain things. And otherwise, I'd end up obsessive compulsive. And as long as I was working 60 hours, 70 hours, 80 hours a week, I was fine. And as soon as I had a few weeks off, I'd start to become all obsessive compulsive. And I didn't quite understand what the hell was going on. And I went to see some psychologists, and I started looking more in. I started going more and more into like learning about deep psychological therapy, because I don't know. I mean, I knew so much, but I didn't know enough to not end up in these obsessive compulsive episodes, which were becoming more and more classic. Like more, I was becoming germophobic, but only occasionally. It was very episodal. Anyway, I'll just skip a lot of details. 2005, I come back to Moncton with the intention of visiting, end up staying, fell in love with Jessica. We're dating. I'm not ready to commit to a future relationship, but whatever. I'm in Moncton. And being back in Moncton, this was the end of 2005. So 2005, 2006, I'm in Moncton. And being in Moncton after not living here for 15 years, and being in these familiar surroundings with friends that knew me when I was in high school, and being close to my dad, this all made it easier and easier and easier for me to deal with my mental health issues. Even though I would only experience these obsessive compulsive things in episodes occasionally, I was starting to go see some psychologists, and I was just starting to like delve deeper into it. And being back here where I was a kid was helping somehow. But it still took a few years before I did what's called exposure response prevention, which is a very classic behavioral approach to dealing with obsessive compulsiveness. And all I can say is that when I finally did that, it was the most nightmarish thing of my life, even more nightmarish. I mean, the suicidal period of my life was nightmarish. But when I would do exposure response prevention, which basically meant exposing myself to the very triggers that would bring on an intense obsessive compulsive episode, and I would not follow through with the compulsion, and I would basically sit with thousands of obsessive thoughts moving through my brain, and the most intense panicked anxiety in my gut, my solar plexus. I felt like I was going to die, like I was going to ruin my life if I didn't follow through with the compulsion. And I would ride it out for 20 minutes. A couple times it took 40 minutes. And ride it out meant that it would actually eventually subside. And this is the breakthrough of this kind of therapy, because people who struggle with obsessive compulsiveness, they always follow through with the compulsion, because that's what calms them down. But when you follow through, when you don't follow through with the compulsion, and you allow yourself to sit with the crazy thoughts and intense feelings of terror, and you sit with them, you don't do anything. You just experience it for 20 to 40 minutes. And then it all goes away. And it goes away without you having done anything. You're like, whoa. And this was the beginning of me starting to heal deep stuff that had never truly been addressed. Yeah, the Tai Chi and the Qigong and all that helped with so many things, but this stuff needed to be faced.
So you're just basically like facing it face to face. That's basically what that's all about.
Like being with it, like being with the most terrifying thoughts and feelings.
Yeah.
You know, which, let's face it, is what good psychotherapy is. When people do high doses of psilocybin, or when people do like prolonged fasting, or whatever it is, or you go see a good psychotherapist, or you do EMDR or whatever. Good therapy brings you into experiencing that which is troubling you, and you experience it, and you experience it, and experience it, and eventually start to experience it changing for the better. And anyway, from 2006 till 2009, I was experiencing more and more deep healing. And I kind of skipped this part, but like back in France when I was catering and stuff, I picked up the habit of smoking hash again. And in Moncton, up until this exposure response prevention, I was still using it. I used it very minimally. Like I would have like a hit or two a day. But with the exposure response prevention, the really deep predispositions for anxiety were literally changing. It was neuroplasticity. It was conscious changing of deep wirings within my nervous system. And from 2006 to 2009, I just healed more and more and more. And everything else, the musculoskeletal system, the digestion, everything I knew about those systems were also being enhanced by this deeper healing, if you'd like to put it that way. 2009, is when I turned 40. And by that time, I had been involved with Nadine for about 2 years. And that was a very, again, loving relationship, but no commitment on my part. And for 2 years, we were together on and off, mostly because I would break up every so often. And then after 2 years, 2009, we really were broken up, and she started moving on with someone else. And I went through this crazy revelation period of my life. It was just the most amazing experience. No drugs, no alcohol. I mean, alcohol had not been part of my life for a long time, but nothing except just experiencing my heart and vulnerability. And I was experiencing stuff in my heart region of my body. I mean, it was just crazy. And I would be talking to Armand and people that I trusted, and and I'd be opening up about things that I'd never opened up about since I was like 4. It's hard to put into words, but let's just say that things happened that resulted in me feeling super open-hearted and understanding that I had a tendency since the age of 4 to keep certain things to myself. And I just took that keep it to me yourself box and just opened it, not with everybody, but with a lot of people. I was prepared to tell anybody anything about myself at that point. And I was practicing vulnerability, and I started learning about Brene Brown. I started listening to Susan Johnson, Dr. Susan Johnson, not Johansson, but Susan Johnson, who's wrote the book Hold Me Tight. She's a psychologist and a professor and a researcher, and she's really into emotion. She's the founder of emotional focused therapy. And I just started learning more and more and more about the neuroscience of emotion and what works and what doesn't work. And at least statistically speaking, and practicing vulnerability and authenticity. And I'd been in Moncton at that point for 4 years. It was the longest I had stayed in one place. Toronto, that's not true. Toronto, I had been there for 5 years. But Moncton, 4 years, had been, aside from Toronto, the longest I'd been in one place in the last 15 years at that point in my life. And it was my hometown. And I don't know, my pride and everything just started getting put more into appropriate context, and my willingness to let people help me, not in a dependent way, but help me help myself. I was just more and more clear about that. And it was amazing. And I was starting to, and that's when I started to experience happiness, real happiness. It was amazing. I have chills thinking about it, and I don't know. I mean, I had already started up the Earth Day event by then, and I don't know. I just became more and more I was catering and all of the health stuff. I would help anyone with a massage, teach them how to stretch, teach them whatever I knew when it came to musculoskeletal stuff or food or cooking or anything. I would help people, but I always did it on the side. I always did it, my teacher, my original teacher is a monk. Like, I just did it. And my way of earning a living was catering.
Yeah.
And in Moncton. And so next thing you know, I was also very, I had started up the Earth Day event. And so being part of community and giving of myself was just, I practiced that in various ways. And I had a good balanced life, and I was happier and happier. And I was just, my understanding of my inner being and the outer world, the outer being, was getting better and better, and life was just better and better. And it didn't take long before, Botsford Station opened up, and there's just more and more community-minded people that I was connecting with, and my cooking skills would work out great, and, when it comes to community activities and stuff. And next thing you know, I was I basically was running all the catering at La Terrasse, making really good money. Well, I kind of skipped a part. In 2011, there was the whole safe water thing. So my experience, my communication skills, my overall ability to manage my health, my stress, which at that point was really great, were better than ever. And my care and love for Moncton and community were at an all-time high. And I was a part of Moncton. I was a part of community here, many communities. Through the Earth Day event, I had come to know many of the politicians and councillors and mayors, and it's just hard to put into words. But in 2011, I went to a meeting to learn about the dilemma, the potential, it's still a controversial issue, but I learned about the potential chronic long-term effects of fluoride and why it's probably not a good idea to add fluoride to public water. Now, as I say this, there's probably a lot of people thinking like, oh, here we go, conspiracy theory. But look, I went to a meeting, I heard about the issue, I went off, I took my research skills, I started doing research, I looked at both sides of the issue, I looked at what the public health and dental associations had to say, I looked at what the critics, the PhD critics, not the conspiracy YouTube stuff. I looked at what PhDs in toxicology, physiology, what else? Toxicology, human physiology, immunology, dentistry. There's a small percentage of dentists that disagree with water fluoridation. Biochemistry. Biochemistry was big. I was looking at what the PhDs in these fields had to say when it came to why they didn't think that it was good, why they thought people should minimize their exposure to fluoride. Minimize. And the more I did this, the more I came to agree with that it's better not to put it in the water, and that even from an ethical perspective, putting something in the water for the sole purpose of having a medication effect on the public just didn't seem right. You can't control the dose. There were just so many reasons not to do it. And gradually I became more and more involved in a campaign, and by the summertime of 2011 I realized that it was much more complicated than I originally thought. It was a very political issue. There were people from Health Canada and New Brunswick Health, basically the national, provincial public health and dental associations were sending representatives to City of Moncton and DIEP and Riverview, trying to convince them that we were a bunch of nutcases and that they should continue to fluoridate. And I was basically halfway up a mountain that I thought I was going to be at the top of the mountain. I realized I was halfway up the mountain. And I made a decision that year to give it everything I had. And I was blessed with the collaboration of PhDs across the country and the states that mentored me and helped me not only better understand the science of how fluoride can affect different aspects of human physiology, but I was also mentored in, effective engagement, compassion, respect. I would watch videos by Martin Luther King and Gandhi and realize, like, okay, if I'm going to do this, I need to be very respectful, because if I'm militant, if I take my anger and my frustration and I approach decision makers with that, that's not going to work. And besides, I've always really valued freedom to think, and I've always really valued being allowed to make up my own mind. So I took all the information that I was learning and organized and refined it, and I basically researched the data so that I could refine it, and I was very, very adamant that I would approach decision makers, counselors, mayors, whatever, with the information, with the intention to just I would just ask them to consider it. I didn't ask anyone to agree with me. I wanted people to simply evaluate the issue. And I learned so much. And they eventually voted to stop fluoridating. And, from there, I don't know, I went to Seattle and Portland for a couple months, started making peace with my mom's husband, my stepdad, because we had a real issue. That was all catalyzed by sweat lodge ceremonies. It's around this time of life where I got introduced to sweat lodge ceremonies. So 2012, I become like the full-time caterer for La Terraz. I'm making really good money. I'm working a lot, but I'm making really good money. I'm going to sweat lodge ceremonies, which for me really fit into my overall principles and values about self-cultivation. It didn't take long before I was, going pretty much once a week. So much learning from Noel Millier and different, just the teachings, which for me were very parallel to whatever I had experienced with the Taoists and the Buddhists and the Confucius and what I had learned from the Vedic teachings from India. Like, they were all parallel, and they were also parallel with neuroscience, which I was still learning. I was still studying neuroscience and human physiology. Like, there was all these parallels. And I was like, wow, like this is what I want. I want to hone in on the common denominators, the very core principles that, the seeds that give birth to these different belief systems and practices that are able to, help people cultivate their health in a very measurable way. And so that's just where I was at, By the time 2014 rolled around, I was tired of all the time I had to put into catering. I had saved up quite a bit of money, and I had decided, you know what? It's 2014. I got my medical school, my university background in human physiology, neuroscience. I got my ongoing studies in neuroscience and human physiology. I got all this ancestral wisdom stuff from Taoism and Buddhism and Confucianism, all experience-based. I got increasing amount of knowledge and experience-based practices from the First Nation people. And every time I helped someone, if they were compliant, the results were good and they were quick, like relatively speaking, and I thought, fuck it, I'm going to stop catering and I'm going to start to make myself available to coach and counsel. And I didn't know how I was going to do that, but I was going to do it. And I ended up doing like so many sessions with people for free. Like, I wasn't making any money, but people were getting better. And I was working with single mothers on welfare and this and that. And sometimes I get paid and sometimes I didn't get paid, and I didn't really care. And I kind of forgot to mention that I had made a trip to Israel and Palestine in the year 2013, and I wanted to go back, so I went back in 2015. And so, 2015 I go to Israel and Palestine. I spent 2 months over there, and I'm really blown away by all the people over there that are working towards peace. All these Arab Israelis and Palestinian Israelis, and I went to the Palestinian territories, and I met all these Jews and Arabs, and they were all into like health and healing and social healing and reconciliation. And came back to Canada 2015, like, fuck, I'm going to go live in Israel and Palestine and see what I can do over there. And oh man, so I'm just kind of like making my way, puttering about, helping people, word of mouth, whatever ways I can. And I'm still working a lot on myself too. Like, I mean, for me, that's like the foundation. Like, I got to be able to walk my talk, and my everyone's got health issues. Like my health wasn't perfect. It was pretty kick ass. Like I was, this was a few years ago. So I was in my late 40s, and everyone thought I was 30 something, and I was, playing ultimate frisbee and living life. And 2016 rolls around. I was supposed to go back to Israel, Palestine. Next thing you know, city councilors are telling me that there's a new push to put the fluoride back in the water, and I'm like, what? And then I had to make this big decision, like, because I'm supposed to leave. I had everything, I was working on leaving, and 2016, 2017, I make a very difficult decision. It took me 3 weeks to make the decision. I decided to stay and spend my own money to work on keeping fluoride out of the water, and it was harder than ever because the pressures were much greater this time around. And that's the year that I built the website, Safe Water Moncton. We had a GoFundMe campaign that did raise some money to help me, but it still cost me more than I made. And I learned a lot again. I learned a lot, but I really, really pushed it that year and ended up grinding my teeth at night, and eventually got a night guard. But no cavities, but the grinding really exposed a lot of my teeth to the dentine. And anyway, by the time that was all done, safewatermoncton.com, if people want to know the details, I was more and more ready to go, doing more and more work with people. But you got to understand, like when I'm working on the Earth Day event, when I'm working on Safe Water Moncton, like there's no time to counsel people. Like eventually I go to Israel. There, all I did was coach and counsel people. I had regular clients. I didn't have that many, but I had enough to make money. And that was cool, seeing again the feedback, the results, very encouraging. People with digestive issues, people with neurological issues, people with musculoskeletal issues. I get back to Moncton 2018 to visit and help with the Earth Day event. 2019, this year that we're in now. And I'm still here. And the summer was a very busy summer, working up at a youth camp, troubled First Nation youth, young First Nation youth. And anyway, working professionally as, helping people with self-development, whether it's musculoskeletal, whether it's, we're going to talk about it, I guess, a little while, like cold exposure training, whether we're using the cold in a therapeutic way, the heat in a therapeutic way, some kind of meditative self-hypnosis, like stillness practice, like going within, without, like in a sitting down meditative practice, whether it's, stretching, self-massage, dynamic movement, whether it's food consultation to help people better choose foods that are right for them in accordance with their tastes and their affordability, their finances. Like, it doesn't matter to me, I usually sum it up to, I do everything I can now to provide people with customized, principle-based practices that are customized to help them optimize their sleep, the way they start their day when it comes to some kind of mind-body practice, the way they hydrate, the way they eat, and the way they deal with difficult emotional experiences, thoughts, feelings, and stress. That's what I want to spend the rest of my life doing.
It sounds like your entire lifetime from birth till to this date was you cultivating knowledge and wisdom through these experiences so that you could now you can bring forth and share what you learned in whatever way you can to others who are willing to listen.
It's been a lot of training, I guess. Yeah.
It's not a lifetime of training, It also sounds like to me like one of your specialties, if you want to even call it that, is taking on really big tasks that not everybody is willing to do or even has the capability to do, like dealing with that Safe Water Moncton that's like a classic example of David versus Goliath in a way. You know, you're up against like big, you know, dentists from who are really supporting fluoride and so on, and then also most recently, which we could talk about another time, is your work and due to your values helping to at least try to get people out of a local pyramid scheme that had been happening and so forth. So for me, I think from my observation, it looks like you're really good at taking on these big tasks that not everybody is capable of doing, along with also working with individuals. But so yeah, it's exciting to see the work that you're going to be doing continuing forward. Curious to see what it's going to be. Do you have any plans of what you want to do?
Well, yeah, in fact, my plans are a lot like yours. I mean, like you were telling me earlier tonight about how you've managed to hire and you know, it sounds like you've got a combination trade for partial trade for services and partial you're paying someone to design a website for you.
Yeah.
And you know, you're starting your podcast stuff, and I mean, like, you know, you're getting certified as a coach, and I mean, I also at this point, you know, really would like to get an online, like I'd like to have like a website, a YouTube channel, not because I want to make money off YouTube, but let's face it, I mean, if I'm going to earn, like, I want to help anyone. I don't want money to ever be a deciding factor whether or not I'm going to help someone. And when I say help, I always mean specifically help them help themselves. Like, that's very important to me. But if I'm going to help someone help themselves, I don't want money to be a deciding factor. At the same time, I mean, if I'm not earning a living, I'm not able to help people who may not necessarily be able to afford to, you know, help me pay my bills. So let's face it, you know, I've been dabbling with coaching and consulting now for a few years. And if we want to make money with that, I mean, corporations, banks, like institutions like government, schools, I mean, they have budgets that are increasingly including funds for helping their employees with their personal health, mentally, physically, emotionally, you name it. And let's face it, in the year 2019, 2020, if you don't have a website and you don't have videos, that's like the new business card. I mean, you can get, I do get clients through word of mouth, but I'm going to get more, it's going to be easier to get clients through having a good online presence.
Yeah.
And I also have content that I want to share. At the same time, I mean, who knows? Maybe I'll eventually get more into it, but to be honest with you, making videos by myself, it's something that, I mean, maybe the more I do it, like when I do it, it's okay. But I'd rather be with people. Like, I'd rather be teaching a workshop. I'd rather be working with someone one-on-one than making a video by myself. If I had some people to make the videos with me, that would be definitely more fun and more motivating. So I guess at this point in my life, I'm, you know, because I have the skills. Like, I have skills to make a website. I know I can do it. I've done it. I have skills to make videos. I'm still learning about technology and editing and all that. But I know I can learn it. The only thing is that I really want to collaborate. I want to be part of a team. And even with Safe Water Moncton or Earth Day, even though I did most of the work, I had a team. I had all kinds of people to collaborate with. And, you know, so even though now my quote unquote educational, you know, empowering, health empowering, self-development business is going to be profit, it's going to, you know, like I have regular rates and a sliding scale fee structure. But I really am looking, I'm really praying and looking, my radar is up, like I'm putting the word out, like I'm looking for people who want to collaborate with me, who want to help me with who want to be part of the kind of content. It's not even help me, like, because I'm more than happy for other people. Like, we could even share the website, like, who want to put out similar content, like, who agree about the kinds of things I want to put out there when it comes to food and eating habits and mentality and attitude and, you know, mind-body practices. I'm looking to be part of a team. And, you know, eventually in this long-term vision, you know, there's going to be a center, ideally more than one center. Like, I'd love to help establish, like, you know, these self-cultivation centers that have, like, ice baths and wet saunas and, like, multi-purpose workshop spaces and a learning kitchen where people can come together and, you know, really learn about all these different ways of biohacking and optimizing physiology. My website, I already own the domain name. So I own the domain name optimalphysiologytraining.com. And I usually call what I do optimal physiology training. And I use the word physiology very intentionally.
Yeah.
So where I'm at right now, it's developing appropriate online presence, putting out appropriate content. The reason I say appropriate, which is a word I say a lot, is because honestly, when it comes to health, fitness, people online, including many of the ones that I really appreciate, like I love Ben Bickman and Ben Greenfield and Peter Attia, and I love the podcast that Tom Bilio puts out, and Tim Ferriss and Joe Rogan, and, you know, and Paul Saladino. Like, I'm a big fan of Paul Saladino. But I just don't want to spend all my time online. And I really want to make sure that any social media or any videos, that they are basically just making it easier for people to connect with me or anyone else that I'm collaborating with. Because I don't want to just take the path of, like, maximizing money from YouTube videos. Like, I don't want to get into the whole clickbait phenomena, right? Which is super prevalent. I mean, it would be so easy, like, you know, to just go that path, but I don't want to take that path. Like, so I really want to make sure that whatever I put out online is really something I genuinely believe is of value, and not just taking advantage of that. Oh, it's got the right catchphrase, and oh, it's got the right, you know, because you look at a lot of it out there, and it's like, wow, you know, like, okay, so this theme is happening now, so we'll just put this title, and it'll catch everyone's attention. You know,
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I know.
So yeah, I'm very much still at a startup phase.
Well, it sounds like we share a lot of similar visions. Like, I've had a lot of basically every idea that you've said is ideas that I've already had, and also other people I know too. So I think we live in a world where, you know, in order to function well as a society, we have to collaborate. So I think this is the point where we're at. So, I mean, looks like it's time to work together on these things.
Well, yeah, it's funny working together. I mean, if you look at it, humans, I mean, working together can be like anything. It's powerful, first of all. People often are more effective when they're part of, you know, people, not always, but can be more effective when they're part of a group. But that's not necessarily a good thing. Like, you look at the public health, you look at all these organizations that I'm quite critical of, corporations, oil companies, they're fucking effective, right? Armies are incredibly effective. So collaborating is a human thing. I mean, we evolved. You know, I'm big into evolutionary biology and archaeology and anthropology, and I mean, we are wired to work together. And this individualistic phase that has been really birthed from the Industrial Revolution, I think what you're saying, you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, like, I think what you're saying is more and more of us who are born into the individualism culture are realizing, wow, let's get together and collaborate, because that's going to help bring our dreams and that, you know.
Well, yeah. I mean, as I've heard so many people talk about this center idea, and not as much people talking about like the specific things that we like to do, like ice baths and coaching and stuff like that. But a lot of people have this vision of a center that is basically focused on helping people in whatever way is possible in existence, in many different ways. And so it's like, why not collaborate? Because like you said, there's all these separate people like Ben Greenfield and Paul Saladino and all these people who have different podcasts and who even like offer different coaching services and have centers themselves to help people. Well, wouldn't it be more effective if we just got together, us like-minded people, and created something like what we're imagining, rather than just having our own separate thing? Why don't we just collaborate? You know?
Yeah, and I mean, I guess that's what's happening. Like,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, we're like-minded people are coming together, and people like you and I mean, from what I know about you, you know, I'm 50, you're 28, but you still somehow, you know, for whatever reasons, share a lot of my ethical values, I guess, because that's often ethics, like you talked about the pyramid scheme, you know, and I mean, that can't really compare that to Safe Water Moncton, but yeah, I guess for a month and a half, I was incredibly concerned about people, you know, who are very dear to my heart, and other people, and I wanted to do whatever I could to, again, not convince anyone of anything, but to bring information. Like, when, you know, I always use there's three qualities that I feel decide whether or not information is going to be of any use. And when it comes to something that's contradictory, like when it comes to the pyramid scheme, you had some people claiming that it was actually an ethical, a totally ethical way for people to come together and support each other mentally, emotionally, and financially, and that it was just a way, it was just win-win. Like, people were going to come together and everyone's going to benefit. And, you know, money, like anything tangible, like coconuts and oranges, are things we can measure. And when you can measure something, you can use mathematics to you know, when you're measuring large numbers and organizing large numbers, well, numbers, mathematics. And as you know, we looked at it and said, whoa, people will only make money in this at the expense of people losing. And the vast majority of people will lose. Therefore, it is not ethical. And when you take, in that particular case, when you take concepts of selflessness, community support, you know, and you combine it with like retreats and meditation, like all these practices that are so sacred, so important. If people don't like the word sacred, like, you know, so special, and then you mix it up with a greedy, exploitative, money organizing enterprise, which not only isn't ethical but is actually illegal. Yeah, I mean, so yeah, for a month and a half, I did everything I could to try and help people better understand, and then so that they can make their own decisions. But what I was going to say is that, you know, when it comes to trying to decide, when it comes to a contradictory issue like fluoride or this food or that food or this way of working out or that way of working out or whatever, like philosophies, ideas, when we're trying to decide what makes more sense, I always say, well, what we need, there's three things we need. We need the most relevant, the least biased, and the most verifiable data, evidence, information. If it's relevant, okay. Is it, how biased is it? What, you know, how biased is it? And how verifiable is it? And if we're going to use any kind of scientific research, we have to ask, is it published? Okay. Where is it published? How does that scientific journal rank in the now very large hierarchy of scientific journals? Okay. What were the controls like for that particular study? How many variables did they control for? What was the bias level of the researchers? And once we assess things, and if we have that approach, now a lot of people think, well, I don't have time for that. It's like, well, you don't have to, you can devote an hour a week for a month to try and understand something. Because if it comes to eating, when it comes to major financial decisions, we'll spend a bit of time investing it, because it's going to have consequences that can last like decades, if not your entire life. Like, you get to know someone, I've counseled so many people, especially women, who've had really horrible, abusive experiences with relationships, and we all know how it works. Like, we meet someone in the beginning, lots of chemistry, lots of attractiveness. I mean, maybe not always the case, but most of the time in the times we live in. There's the honeymoon phase. Everyone's on their best behavior. Then we start to really get to know them. And oh my God, they're controlling. They're jealous. They're a slob. Oh, they're insensitive. Whatever. And it's like, when we start to get to know them better, but we've already bonded, and the sex is really good, now it's really hard to move on. And there's so many things that if we could, like, it's funny because if you look at humans, like, we're not like horses and we're not like a lot of animals. We're not born, and we don't come out of the womb ready to walk and run around. We need a lot of nurturing. From a neuroscientific perspective, our brain is not finished its initial conditioning until we're 25. So our frontal lobe, which is so important for compassion, all of the heart-oriented ways of all of the heart-based values, compassion, empathy, sincerity, authenticity, courage, that's all frontal lobe dependent. Foresight, having an idea of the impact of our decisions. And it's not fully developed until we're 25. We can keep developing it and rewiring it, but it's not done until we're 25. And our impulsivity, our potential for impulsivity and compulsion, that's running high right from the get-go. And it's important. But I mean, it's funny, like, it's really funny how when we're trying to better understand something, it's the emotional, we identity politics. Like, most people who think fluoride is good just think it because they trust their dentist, their doctor, their association, their professor, you name it. Most people who think that fluoride is bad, they just don't think it's good because they don't trust their doctor, they don't trust the government. They watched a bunch of YouTube videos or whatever. So when you really want to understand, like, the nuances and get really accurate, then you need to spend some time learning and questioning things, and having the courage to step outside your tribe. If you grow up in a white supremacist neo-Nazi community, and you're going to even attempt to consider that, people of color or people of other religions might be just as intelligent, just as, you name it, as, basically go beyond the racism, well, man, that's going to be pretty daunting, because you're going to need to be willing to break away from these bonds, right? And humans are interesting because we're all born quite dependent in many, many, many ways. I mean, and then we start to develop independence. And if we're fortunate enough, we can come to recognize the value of what I call interdependence. And that's when we can really collaborate and connect with others in a very free-flowing way. It's like, I'm going to connect with your association. I'm going to connect with you guys. I'm going to do this. And I'm going to do it because I agree with the goal, the mission, whatever. intellectually, I agree with it, with the cause, if you'd like, or the mission, and emotionally, I click with you guys, and there's chemistry. But I know that if things get really weird at one point, I'll have what it takes to move on. I'm not going to get stuck. A lot of people avoid commitment and connecting now because they're afraid they're going to get stuck again.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people I think are kind of still in that independent, individualistic phase, and you know, I think it's great that you already, because it took me a long time. It took me a long time to fully understand the power, the benefit, and the hazards, what you need to cultivate to be able to truly start to engage in an interdependent way, you know, where it's like, I'm going to engage in devotion and know that I'm not going to get stuck, you know. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, it does.
Yeah. But, you know, why don't we talk a bit about, like, you talked about, like, ice baths and stuff. Like, should we talk a bit about, I don't know, should we get into, or have we been going too long here?
We should talk about that, but I think now we'll
should tie it off?
Yeah, we'll tie it off because I'm kind of hungry. All right. That was good, though. So thank you very much.
Well, I hope we do
Good
it again,
backstory.
because I'd love to have some more conversation, and I feel like we should have some more conversation in the future where I don't do so much of the talking. Like, if you want, let's do a podcast where you get to tell your story.
Oh, yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah.
Okay? And then maybe that should be our next one.
Yeah.
You do your story. I'll ask you some questions. You do most of the talking and sharing, you know. And then I think it'd be great if we then we could do some podcasts where we talk more about our transformation experiences and talk about, maybe we focus in on like the food aspect.
Yeah.
Like the musculoskeletal stuff.
Zoom in on certain subjects.
Yeah, zoom in on, like, because you and you've been through a lot of transformation. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know if we should tell people now, but like, let's just stay tuned, because when Jordan talks about his transformation, you know, it's going to be pretty heavy. Like, and I skipped a lot of details too, but
Yeah.
I mean, we both have been through really measurable, like, people look at me today. They go, wow, you're such great shape, your skin, your muscles. You know, I did some nude modeling last week for this life drawing course, you know, and I mean, like, you know, my body's flexibility, muscle tone, overall physiological function is just so good and really statistically exceptional for my age. But what most people don't even know is that it's way better than it was 10, 15 years ago. Like, when I was 35, if my 35-year-old was here, version of myself, I could kick his ass, like, you know, like, and that's so important, that, you know, transformation, it's not just an intellectual woo-woo psychological thing. Like, emotion is important, but like physically, like, you know, biohacking, growing younger biologically,
Yeah.
you know, whether you pull it off for the rest of your life or not, I don't know. But it's so interesting that the way we think, our attitude, which is why for me meditation and prayer is so important. You know, the chemicals that are catalyzed and secreted, the chemicals that are produced and distributed inside our body, that are done so as a result of thinking, there's such a range between toxicity and benefit. The way we think and feel and behave, never mind behavior, the way we think and feel is so powerful, so important for some kind of internal meditative prayer, intentionality, self-hypnosis practice. And then from there, you know, what you eat, the decisions you make, the behaviors you engage in with food, the relationship that each of us are going to cultivate with food, not just what we eat, but how we eat it.
Yeah.
The relationship we're going to cultivate with the way we touch our body, self-massage, the way we move our body, stretching and dynamic movement. That relationship, the potential for incredible states of experience is just, or the opposite, right? Neglect movement too much, engage too much in certain postures, sit at your desk too long, stare at your computer too long. Whatever too long is subjective. But if you neglect, if you overuse, and whatever you are overusing and or neglecting will, by overuse, means that it is causing impediment and hindering your overall state of being. And same thing with everything, right? So we want to be like honing in on these basic principles that are underlying First Nation traditions, Vedic traditions, Chinese traditions. We want to hone in on that stuff so that no matter what foods we happen to be exposed to, we can make the best choices with regards to, like you said, being our better version of ourselves in an imperfect way, in a way that we know we're never going to be perfect, right? In a loving way.
Always growing, always learning. There's always more to do.
Yeah, in a humble way. Balancing our courage and strength with humility. And anyway, it'd be cool if we did some podcasts where we get your story, and then eventually we can talk a lot about food. Because food, let's face it, I don't know if you agree. I want to ask you something. If you were to say, like, when it comes to sleep, hydration, meditation, food, and exercise, which would you say are the easiest ones for people to work with, and which would you say are the most challenging? Which are the ones that have the most contradictions out there?
The most contradictions?
Yeah, like when it comes to sleep, like hydration, like there aren't a lot. Would you say there's a lot of contradictions? Like personally, I feel that meditative, mental, emotional practices, diet, and exercise, I feel that those are the ones that are the most contentious and almost like religious. It's like, no, you got to do it this way. No, you got to do it this way. No, you're wrong. No, you're wrong. Whereas sleep, people are like, yeah, you need sleep.
They just do it. They don't really think about it.
But I mean, if you tell people, like, listen,
or don't do it.
if you tell people, listen, the more you sleep in darkness, the better it's going to be for you. The more time you have before, like, if you give yourself time between eating and sleeping, that's going to free up your blood. It's a good habit. Try to sleep in darkness. Try not to eat a couple hours before you go to sleep, at least not a lot of food. Try not to have any lights allowed in your room. Use a night mask or blinds. Try to keep the temperature in your room as cool as you can, as long as you're comfortable and able to fall asleep. I think try to use a blue light blocker on your screens, and maybe even glasses to block out the blue light so that your brain's not getting stimulated. I think most people are not going to argue too much with that. If you tell people, listen, water's really important, try to, sip water so that you're hydrating your body. But I think that when it comes to like self-massage techniques or stretching, or exercise, like especially exercise, that's where it gets like very competitive. It's like, no, you should do this, you should do that. No, this is not good. No, this is not good. And then when it comes into food, I think food is the one that's the most contentious. It's like, no, you got to be vegan. Yeah. No, you got to be this. No, you got to be that. No. And it's like, whoa.
Well, I think we can get into the both sides of those things and the contentiousness of them. But let's end it right here.
Yeah, let's do it.
We'll talk another time. Thanks for coming on, man.
Well, thank you, buddy.
You're very welcome. It was interesting to hear your story, and I'm looking forward to dig deeper and take a closer look at some of the things we mentioned today.
We are, man. And we're going to get into some practices together, too.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right.